Welcome in, everyone, to another deep dive with us. Today, we're going to be tackling a pretty big concept, justice.
Oh, yeah, definitely a big one. And to guide us through this, we've got excerpts from Tim Keller's book, Generous Justice.
Right. Really interesting book. He approaches justice through a biblical lens, and I'm really interested to see what kind of insights come up as we go through this.
Yeah, me too. I think there's a lot to unpack there. And I think what makes Keller so good is he manages to make these kind of heady concepts, justice, grace, things like that. He makes them really relatable.
Yeah, and that's actually what drew me to the book, too. Like, right off the bat, he starts with his own personal journey. And he talks about this classmate named Jeffrey who was really ostracized. And what really struck me was Keller saying that he was part of the problem. Like, he didn't do anything to help Jeffrey. He actually avoided him.
It's so easy to just fall into that, like it's easier to just go along with things than rock the boat.
Exactly. And it makes you realize how easy it is to be blind to injustice, especially when it's easy to look away.
Yeah, and I think this experience with Jeffrey really planted the seeds for a much bigger awakening for Keller. He talks about encountering the civil rights movement and realizing that injustice wasn't just these isolated incidents, it was like woven into the very fabric of society.
Yeah, and that made him question everything, even his own faith. He saw this disconnect between his secular friends who were super passionate about social justice and then the silence he perceived within the Christian community.
Yeah.
It's a tough thing to reconcile.
Definitely. That tension between faith and social action, like how do they intersect? It's something a lot of people wrestle with.
For sure. And that's where Keller's journey takes this really interesting turn. He found this group of Christians who were actively working for social justice.
Okay, so they were putting their faith into action.
Yeah, and it really pushed him to go back to the Bible, to really dig in and see what it actually had to say about justice.
So what did he find?
Honestly, some of it really surprised me. He goes all the way back to the Old Testament and finds all these laws about debt forgiveness, freeing slaves, even redistribution of wealth.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's really radical stuff. There's this concept called the year of jubilee, where like every 50 years land would be returned to its original owners.
Oh, wow. I've never heard of that. So it was like intentionally preventing this huge wealth inequality.
Exactly. It really challenges you to think differently about, property and our responsibility to make sure everyone has a fair chance.
I mean, just imagine if we applied that principle today. It makes you wonder how we might approach issues like affordable housing or access to resources.
It's a huge, it's a radical concept, but it definitely gets you thinking. And the thing is, Keller doesn't just leave it in the past. He brings these principles forward, right, and actually suggests ways that they could be applied today.
Okay, so how would that look? What are some of his suggestions?
Well, he talks about businesses sharing profits, not just with shareholders, but with employees and customers.
Oh, interesting.
And also governments creating programs that actually empower people instead of fostering dependency.
Okay, so it's less about charity and more about actually building a system that is inherently more just.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just about social and economic structures either. Keller actually tackles this common misconception about Christianity, this idea that it prioritizes love and forgiveness over justice.
Oh, I've definitely heard that before.
Right. But Keller argues that you can't separate them. They're completely intertwined.
Makes sense. I mean, you can't really have one without the other.
Exactly. And he uses some powerful examples to illustrate this. He brings up the parable of the Good Samaritan. Remember where it's the outcast, the one that society rejects? That's the one who shows compassion.
Oh, yeah. That's a great example.
It completely flips the script on who we think is responsible for justice, right?
Oh, yeah.
And then he brings in this really fiery sermon by this 19th century Scottish minister who basically argues that true Christianity means like truly emulating Christ's radical generosity.
So it's about action, like actually doing something to help those in need.
Yeah, exactly. True love compels action. You don't just offer forgiveness. You offer tangible help. And for Keller, that extends beyond just individual acts of kindness.
Okay, so it's got to be something bigger, something more systemic.
Exactly. He uses the example of Sandtown, Baltimore, which is a community that's really been ravaged by poverty.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of Sandtown.
He talks about the work of Mark Gornick and New Song Church, and they took this really holistic approach, addressing not just the symptoms of poverty, but like the systemic issues that actually created it.
So it's about getting to the root of the problem, not just putting a Band-Aid on it.
That's right. And this all leads up to Keller introducing this really, I think it's a key concept. It's called shalom.
Shalom. I've always thought of that as just meaning peace.
Yeah, me too. But it's actually so much more than that.
So, what is it then, if it's more than just peace?
Exactly. It's not just the absence of war or conflict. It's about a flourishing society where everyone has their needs met and can actually contribute their gifts. It's about right relationships with each other, with creation, and with God.
I see. So it's this wholeness, this sense of everything being in its right place.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where justice comes in. Keller seems to be saying that true justice is about working towards this vision of shalom, repairing those broken relationships and creating a world where everyone can thrive.
So it's about restoring things to the way they were meant to be.
Right. He uses this really powerful analogy. He describes justice as like going to those places where the fabric of shalom has been torn apart, where people are suffering and oppressed, and actually working to mend those tears.
Wow. I like that imagery. It's not just about punishment or even just alleviating suffering. It's about this deeper restoration.
And to illustrate this, he shares this really compelling story from Martha's Vineyard.
Oh, yeah. What about Martha's Vineyard?
Well, they had this really high incidence of deafness there, and it actually led the entire community to learn sign language.
Wow. So deafness became a non-issue.
Exactly. Because the hearing world adapted.
That's amazing. What a powerful example of what can happen when a community chooses inclusion over exclusion.
Right. And it wasn't about charity or pity. It was about recognizing the inherent dignity and worth of every member of their community.
I love that. And what's interesting? They ended up discovering all these unexpected benefits, like learning sign language actually enriched the lives of the hearing community as well.
It shows that justice isn't just about sacrifice. It's about creating a richer, more vibrant society for everyone. And, well, that's actually a great place to pause for now.
Okay, yeah. Sounds good.
We'll pick up this conversation in part 2, where we'll dive into some of the challenges of actually defining and pursuing justice in a world with so many different viewpoints.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. It's a big topic, but I think we're off to a good start.